Okay, so Ty, picture this. It's 2 a.m. and your phone jolts you awake. Okay, your CTO's on the line, voice is trembling, the network's been breached, hackers are inside, and within minutes, they spread like wildfire through your systems. Pretty scary, right? Well, guess what? Once attackers get inside your network, they can move laterally in as little as 27 minutes on average. That's faster than an episode of your favorite sitcom, Ty. But no laughing track here, though. It's a nightmare scenario for any business, right?
It is, and it's not just hypothetical. All right. Cyber crime is getting bolder and faster. And in fact, John, did you know that in 2024 alone, scammers drained over $1 trillion from the global economy? That's a trillion with a T, not millions, trillions. The breaching networks, stealing data, and costing companies big time. Did you know that the average data breach costs around $4.35 million? And that's according to IBM. So, for business leaders, that's the kind of late night phone call that keeps you up forever.
Yeah, but today, look, we're not here to just spread the doom and gloom. We're here to talk solutions, right, Ty? So, look, everybody, welcome to AzBytes. This is the podcast where we dive into all things Microsoft Azure and cloud computing. So I'm John, and as always, with me is Ty. And in today's episode, it's going to all be about secure networks. What does this mean? Why is this mission critical for businesses? And how is Microsoft Secure Future Initiative pushing all of this kind of context forward? So grab your coffee or maybe an energy drink, right, Ty? Because we're about to secure those networks with a little bit of fun, a few facts, and a little bit of really bad humor along the way.
Absolutely. So, let's get started with a quick story, shall we? But a real one. All right. I'm not going to call out the company name, but it is a real life example. So, a business had a data breach a few years back. Hackers got through the network credentials through a HVAC contractor. Yep, that's right, guys. Somebody who manages the air conditioning. So once inside the network, they roamed free. And you know what? Ask the reason why. Well, poor network segmentation for starters. And what happened? The systems allowed him to get to the payment systems because they wasn't isolated. So what actually happened? The attacker literally waltzed from ventilation system monitoring into the cash register system, stealing credit card data and putting malware on there. End result, 40 million credit cards, details and information was stolen over the holiday season. Ouch.
Yeah, right, Ty. I guess here's the kicker. Experts later pointed out that it was all completely preventable, of course. The company should have segmented its network to ensure that the HVAC vendor had no access whatsoever to the payment systems. And these were the words of the CTO at the time, noting that even basic industry standards, things like the PCI standards for credit cards, where they recommend network segmentation to protect all that sensitive data. In fact, if that were in place, the attackers would have been able to install any of this malware. And if proper segmentation had been in place, then this wouldn't have happened. So talk about a tough lesson in network security, Ty.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's just one famous example. I'm sure that our listeners and viewers, they can reel off half a dozen that's happened. Very, very broad headlines. So, anyway, we're seeing similar patterns in ransomware attacks and breaches everywhere. An email, an unsecured device, whatever it is, lets an attacker in. And then, do you know what? It's a flat open network. So it lets somebody steal and pivot towards your crown jewels. Think of breaches as banks, hospitals, governments, and in many cases, the bad guys always succeed. Why? Because once they get a toehold, the network is open. There's no segmentation. It's totally open. Imagine a house, an open plan floor plan. Intruders have a field day, which is crazy. So, um, for one instance, recent threat reports show that attackers escalate through the network within minutes. So, if we don't have time and we don't have the appropriate and put the time in for appropriate roadblocks, we're going to be creating problems for ourselves. So, the lesson for CTOs and business leaders who's watching this, you can have great identity security. You can have strong perimeter firewalls, but if your internal network isn't secure, one slip up can still wreak absolute chaos and havoc.
Yeah, exactly that, Ty. And a secure network isn't just an IT concern. It's really a business survival concern. A well segmented, well protected network can literally be the difference between a contained incident and a company ending disaster. We're talking protecting customer trust, avoiding all those financial losses, and basically keeping your business off the front pages for all the wrong reasons. As the saying goes, security is the foundation of trust. Okay, so and nowhere is that more true than in our network. So the digital highways of our organization really need protecting.
100%. So I can hear people saying, so what? What's Microsoft doing about it? Well, enter the Microsoft Secure Futures Initiative, or as we call it, SFI. All right, this is a Microsoft mega project, and it's all around bolstering security across the company and our products. So, how mega? I can hear people saying, well, it's described as the largest cyber security engineering project in history. All right. So, Microsoft dedicated the equivalent of 34,000 engineers working full time for just over 11 months. And that's to tackle all the top security priorities. So, imagine a small army of engineers all focused on making things secure by design, and that's the key word there. This isn't a minor tune up, it's a full on security overall.
Yeah, exactly, Ty. And one of those core pillars of SFI is actually secure networks. So along with things like protecting identities and obviously engineering systems and all that good stuff, secure networks is actually a fundamental core pillar of SFI. So Microsoft has really realized that to secure the future, they must reduce the risk of lateral movement across those networks, as you illustrated earlier, Ty. So basically, stop those intruders from playing hopscotch right the way through your environment. So, what have they done so far? Actually, a lot. So, according to Microsoft's April 2025 progress report, they'd actually inventoried over 99% of all those network assets and brought them up to enhanced security standards. So, that's a really big deal. So, essentially, you can't really secure what you don't know about. And now that we've got that, in place, everything can be tracked, 99% of everything effectively.
Which is fundamental to moving forward. But what does that mean? Well, we also then add in multiple layers of defense inside the network, right? So think of it like turning a single walled castle into a fortress with moats, outer walls, inner walls, the whole shebang. So, do you know what? If an attacker breaches one layer, they immediately face another. What does that mean? Well, it means increased network isolation and segmentation across the environment. So even within the Azure's, even when sorry, I'll rephrase that. So even within Azure's own data centers, and services, we're already carving things up into security zones. So, for example, production environments are locked so that even if a token or maybe a credential is stolen, it can only be used on a specific network location. No more attackers going left and right, stealing keys, and then moving through hallways and all around to find sensitive data. Stopped. Why? Zero trust. And we're making it and put it into action.
No, exactly. That's great stuff, Ty. And look, it's not just for all those internal changes. Microsoft is really rolling out the new security features for all of us. Microsoft's customers. As a result of this initiative, four big ones have jumped out at me from the report: network security perimeter, DNS security extensions, Azure Bastion Premium, and a new private subnet feature. And if you're an Azure aficionado, these should just really get you excited. So let's break them down in plain English. So first up, network security perimeter (NSP). This is a game changer for securing cloud resources. In the past, locking down platform as a service components like storage accounts and databases, it meant lots of VNets, meant lots of network security groups and private endpoints. Not impossible, but it was a little bit cumbersome. So NSP was introduced a little while back in late 2024, actually lets us all create that unified security boundary around multiple Azure services. Okay, number two, next up is DNS security extension. So DNSSEC, DNS might not sound exciting, but it's the phone book of the internet, and attackers love to tamper with it. Hijacking or spoofing can send you to evil websites without us even really knowing about it. So Azure support for DNS security means that DNS records can be effectively digitally signed. Okay. Number three, Azure Bastion Premium. So if you've ever used Azure, then you probably know about Azure Bastion. It's that managed service that lets us really securely connect through to our VMs via RDP and SSH, through a browser without the need to expose all of those RDP or SSH ports directly to the internet. So with the new premium version, it takes all of that up a notch with some advanced features. For example, it adds seamless file transfer. It'll add port forwarding and integration with an Azure Active Directory for even greater control. Okay. And finally, the fourth piece that jumped out to me at the report is that private subnet feature that I mentioned. So it does sound really basic, but it really is fundamental. Having a private subnet in Azure likely means that subnet is not going to have any kind of internet connectivity by design. Okay. Previously, we could kind of do this with NSGs and UDRs, so user-defined routes, but a native feature to literally mark a subnet as private only ensures nothing sneaks out or in. Ty, what do you think?
I think that's amazing. But what I'm actually hearing is Microsoft's not just saying it. They're not just saying network security is important, but we're actually baking it into all our cloud services. And do you know what's even better? We're sharing the tools with our customers. So do you know what? It's a direct response from real threats. And all these innovations and learnings means that we can be very open and share that we're applying zero trust policies and principles across our whole company, and then turning it into features so that customers can benefit as well. So it's basically a compounding cycle. As we harden our own network, Azure gets new toys, which in turn means that you guys out there can harden your own networks as well. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, and look, Ty, let's not gloss over the sheer scale of all this effort. When you mentioned about this 34,000 engineering months, it signals that security signals that security has really become, that number one priority. Charlie Bell, Microsoft's EVP of security, has basically said that they're reinventing how security is done across the board. Culture, training, new deputy CISOs, everything. For networks specifically, the commitment means that even at the core of Azure Network Fabric, that plumbing that we're all relying on is getting that fortress-like upgrade. So if I'm a CTO using Azure, that's really reassuring, right? It means that the platform that my business is running on is really being fortified continuously, Ty.
Yeah, brilliant. So why don't we move things in a slightly different direction then? So let's talk around what businesses can do to embrace secure networking. All right. So whether you're in Azure, maybe one of the other hyperscalers on-prem or hybrid, do you know what? The principles are still the same or very, very similar. So in our minds, this is some of the approaches, maybe action items, what everyone can consider. So I'll name a couple, maybe five, four or five. All right. So the first one, zero trust network mindset. So what does that actually mean? Well, if you think back not too many years ago, what we'd do is have a crunchy outside. What do I mean by that? We're putting firewalls up, perimeter firewalls. And then do you know what? We'd have a soft inside. Why? It's just a flat network. So zero trust actually flips that around. It means that any attackers might be able to get inside, but they can't go anywhere. So that trust in nothing by default means that you're actually secure to start with. Now, every user, device, and service must continuously prove that it should be allowed on the network, which ultimately means things like strong authentication on access and least privileged network access, and constant validation and verification is required. All right. Number two, again, we keep saying this earlier on, but segmentation and segmenting and isolating your network is key. So don't have one big flat network. I know we like to keep everyone in a big happy family, but actually it allows attackers then to come in and steal the crown jewels. Let's think around where critical databases are, or servers, or services, and make sure that we've got the appropriate security around them, whether that's virtual subnets or networking, or it may be things like Azure Virtual Networks, network security groups, Azure firewalls, whatever it may be, to restrict packets from going across the full entire estate. Okay, number three, let's think around leveraging Azure's new security features. So the ones we've just talked around earlier, it's not marketing, it's not smoke and mirrors, they're there, so turn them on. All right. Maybe two more. I'm conscious that we may be going into some depth with these, but monitor and respond quickly. All right, so if we've got segmentation, it means that we need to be watching, understanding what's happening, and then make sure that his monitoring is so robust that should we see something anomalies, we can take absolute action on it. So what we should be looking at there? Defender for cloud. That's a good one straight away. And then the final one, which I think is the most important. It's not technology driven, but it's an education, people, and cultural thing. So a secure network it is just technology. It's the people and process behind it, and it's the how do developers or IT staff routinely set up the servers or services? Do they have allow all firewalls, for instance, for convenience? And it's changing the culture to a security first mindset. It'll help everybody win. Thoughts, John?
Absolutely, Ty. I mean, it's a solid list of actions you kind of run through there. I can think of a few others like, managing those outputs from those actions, in monitoring those outputs and automatically responding to threats, things like with SIEM and SOAR. But, there's so much. And I think that's the point, right? It can feel overwhelming at times, but just remember, you start small, understand your network, start small with, maybe this week, even have your team map out what your current network looks like, draw a simple diagram of how things are segmented, or maybe not. You might discover, oh, whoa, our finance DB is on the same network segment as some of the user workstations, for example. And look, that's not very good. Quick wins are create a new subnet, VNet, put that database in there and put that tightly controlled access around that. Or maybe even enable MFA for some of the VPN connectivity, or switch to a more of a zero trust network access solution for remote workers. Everything can be connected, authenticated, and monitored. So, and when you're doing that, each step is going to raise the bar for attackers. So, remember, they're generally looking for that low hanging fruit. So don't be an easy pick, right?
100%. And do you know one thing what we may have missed to call out is take advantages of some of the frameworks that are out there. The zero trust architecture guidelines and things of that nature. They are absolutely fantastic for showing you potential architectures, roadmaps, and how to implement and move forward.
Yeah, exactly. And one more tip for business leaders, connect the dots with what the business value looks like for you. So really investing in network security isn't just an IT cost center thing, right? It directly translates to risk reduction, which has got a dollar value. And as we saw and heard about earlier on with breach costs, there's also that uptime and reliability factor to think of. So a secure, well-architected network is less prone to those widespread outages, like a malware outbreak that knocks out all your PCs, as an example. And it really means that your customers' data is safer, which means that your brand's reputation is safer.
And I do like that. But to be fair, here's the kicker. By securing your network, which, let's be truthful, once it felt like, you were putting them guards up for an ever expanding city, medieval walls, and it were just impossible to manage, slowed everything down. But actually, it's now finally becoming manageable with new tools and technologies, what we're embracing. And this is the best bit. If we combine the zero trust mindset with our Azure services, enhance the security on the network, then it means that we're outmaneuvering all the attackers straight away. What do you think to that, John?
Yeah, precisely. This is the point, right? We're just trying to get through, and we can help in many ways as a technology company. So look, I guess there's a bit of a call to action to speak of here for all you folks watching. I think we can make it relatively straightforward, and take the first step now is really the message. Don't wait for that 2 o'clock breach call to overhaul your network. That's when, it's usually the case, but just don't wait for that. So when this episode ends, consider the following 3 things. Okay, first, call up your network or your cloud architect and ask, how are we segmenting and securing our network currently? Is there one obvious improvement that we can make in the next month? Identify that one gap. Next up, secondly, educate yourself and your team. We'll put a link to Microsoft Secure Future Initiative Program report in the show notes here. Look, check the comments below. Give that a read. It's not just full of PR fluff. It's filled with insight on what a world-class security effort really does look like. Share some of your highlights with your IT leadership and take it from there. And finally, third point, if you are already in the Azure ecosystem, why not try out one of the new Azure security features that we talked a little bit about today? Maybe spin up a test of network security perimeter on one of your dev subscriptions and just look into how that's going to work and how you can implement that into your production systems. Maybe turn DNS security on for a specific domain and get them digitally signed, or maybe even enable that Azure Bastion Premium, service for your VMs, and close all of those old RDP ports that you might have open, right?
Mate, they are top tips. So I think ultimately, if we secure the network, and you're thinking around it this way, it's the unsung hero of digital transformation. If we're making sure that we embrace the cloud, remote work, IoT, or whatever the next buzzword is that comes along, and we're doing it safely, then ultimately by making his network security a priority, we're not actually pulling on a handbrake no more. We're enabling innovation, but in a very, very controlled way.
Yeah, well said, Ty. And with that, look, I guess, Ty, it's time to wrap up this episode of AzBytes. Okay, so we really hope we've given you not just the why and the what of secure networks, but the sense of urgency and the excitement to go and strengthen up your own castle's walls, right? The bad guys may be quick and clever, but we're building stronger defenses and we're doing it all together. So across companies and communities, all to secure our collective future.
And remember, every bit or byte matters. Did you get that one? So let's make them secure. And if you found value in this episode, share it with your colleagues, with your friends, the people in your team. Remember to hit like and subscribe for more AzBytes. And as always, we'd love to hear your stories. Have you implemented a cool network security solution? Have you learned anything, even maybe the hard way? But drop something in the comments below and let us learn from each other.
Yeah, great stuff, Ty. So until next time, look, stay safe out there, everybody. I've been John.
And I'm Ty.
And we're going to sign off from this episode of AzBytes. So secure those networks, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one. Stay secure.